The Veridian Belt was not a belt in the astronomical sense, but a slow, churning vortex of galactic neglect, a monument to corporate failure and military waste. It was a region of space where every cubic kilometer held enough depleted plasteel, volatile fuel residues, and exotic isotope shielding to rebuild a small nation, provided you were willing to risk the frequent, unpredictable microsingularity distortions and the occasional, heavily armed rival Salvager. Jax, a self-declared, applied decommissioning specialist, which was 3 syllables for professional space vulture, called it home. His vessel, the Drifter, was an aesthetic and operational affront to modern shipbuilding, a heavily armored but perpetually dented hulk built around a core magnetic grapple system. It looked less like a spaceship and more like a very large, aggressive industrial cleaner that had fallen into a paint mixer. Its only vanity was the roaring, slightly too large fusion reactor that powered its claws and kept Jax in the business of dangerous retrieval. Jax had spent the last 8 solar hours deep inside the carcass of an old Earth Vindicator-class dreadnought, a ruin so vast that its central command spine resembled a cathedral of rust. The air in his suit was stale, tasting faintly of his last protein bar, flavor, vaguely synthetic berry, and the metallic tang of ionizing radiation. He was attempting a delicate extraction of a 6-meter section of phalanx-grade hypervelocity shielding, a job that required surgical precision from his external manipulators. "Just 12 more centimeters, Jax," croaked Dusty, the Drifter's sardonic AI, its voice a synthesized blend of static and disapproval that only Jax could tolerate. "And try not to vaporize the stabilizer struts this time. I am attempting to run life support simulations, and I find the intermittent spikes in ionizing gas distracting." "I am a salvager, Dusty, not a neurosurgeon," Jax muttered, his fingers working the controls. The heavy magnetic grapple whined, exerting colossal, controlled force. And those stabilizer struts were structurally compromised anyway. I was giving them a dignified retirement. The moment the shielding section cleanly detached, activating the automated containment field, the usual quiet of the void was shattered. Not by the dull, familiar clang of metal on metal, Jax was used to that, but by a high-frequency chirp, insistent and pure. It was the signature sound of a non-natural propulsion source entering his immediate zone of operation, a sound that meant either a very foolish amateur or a very serious military entity had just stumbled into his carefully cordoned-off junkyard. Jax immediately retracted the manipulators, overriding the power-down sequence and diverting all available energy to the port-side maneuvering thrusters. The Drifter performed a surprisingly agile pirouette, bringing its main forward sensor array, a salvaged, multi-spectrum radar dish held together with high-tensile zip ties, to bear on the anomaly. It was tucked into a cavity near the dreadnought's propulsion assembly, a wound of fused plasteel where plasma had scored the hull. The object was a personal escape pod. But this was no standard-issue escape vehicle. Most pods Jax found were battered, spherical coffins designed for maximum durability and minimum comfort. This one was teardrop-shaped, coated in a shimmering, iridescent white ceramic, and looked unervingly pristine. It had clearly been subjected to an intense, localized energy blast. The hull was scored and blackened in a pattern that spoke of weaponized, non-Terran plasma, but otherwise, it looked like a piece of functional art. "Oh, look, Jax," Dusty observed with zero enthusiasm. "It appears to be a very expensive, deeply unfortunate piece of jewelry that somehow got lost in our trash heap. Its power signature is fluctuating rapidly. Highly unstable. Do we ignore it and continue salvaging the shielding, which is currently our primary objective, or do we risk life and limb for what is likely a critically damaged, uninsured vessel?" Jax gripped the steering yoke, his eyes focused on the life sign indicators beginning to flicker weakly on the pod's shell. A solitary, fluctuating green spot. "It's a life sign, Dusty. And that pod looks like it contains technology I've never seen before. We take it. Magnetics. Full power. Bring it in slow. We're going to put it next to the volatile power cores. That way, if it explodes, at least it'll take out the most dangerous part of the cargo bay." The retrieval was painstaking. Jax used the grapple with a gentleness that contradicted the Drifter's rough exterior, pulling the pod into the ship's cramped, pressurized cargo bay. The bay itself was a monument to functional chaos, filled with stacks of unlabeled thermal plating, coils of heavy-gauge conductor wiring, and the pervasive scent of ferrous dust and ozone. The moment the pod was sealed in the cargo bay, Jax cycled the airlock and stripped off his heavy suit. He grabbed his plasma cutter, a battered tool that had saved his life more times than he had fingers, and approached the pristine white shell. "The hatch release is keyed to an internal sequence, Jax," Dusty warned. "Attempting to cut through that ceramic will introduce an unpredictable release of compressed gases and potentially reactive coolant." "Duly noted," Jax replied, adjusting the cutter's frequency. "But if I wait for the internal sequence, the passenger might expire from being overly polite. Stand by with the broad-spectrum nanite cocktail. And prep the gurgle for maximum coffee synthesis. I have a feeling this is going to be a long cycle." He sliced the hatch open, the plasma torch hissing in a brief burst of light. The interior of the pod was lined with a rapidly solidifying, translucent gel, the stasis field failing. Inside was the woman. She was dressed in a simple, dark flight suit that seemed to flow over her body. Her skin was a remarkable, almost luminous gold tan, and her features were classically, unervingly beautiful, perfectly symmetrical, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline. But it was the damage that dominated the immediate view. A deep, ragged wound on her lower right abdomen, cauterized crudely by the pod's emergency systems, but still seeping a dark, slow fluid. And then there were the ears. They were long, slender, and curved to a subtle point, like perfectly carved slivers of ivory, a stark, elegant contradiction to the grimy chaos of Jax's cargo bay. "She's bleeding internally, Jax," Dusty stated clinically. "Energy discharge damage. She has approximately 4 minutes of viable consciousness remaining." Jax swore under his breath, shrugging off his own cynicism. He dragged the woman onto his medical cot, a repurposed nutrient delivery table with failing gravitic stabilizers, and grabbed the nanite injector. The nanites were his most expensive possession, a broad-spectrum healing agent capable of patching up everything short of decapitation, but their application was brutal. He didn't waste time with sterilization. He simply sprayed the wound with a blast of hypercoagulant foam and plunged the syringe into her neck, jamming the activation stud. The nanites, microscopic machines programmed for self-assembly and repair, went to work instantly. The woman's body arched, not in pain, but in a massive physiological shock as the nanites began the accelerated reconstruction of vascular and organ tissue. Her eyes, which had been dull, snapped open. They were a vivid, arresting shade of amethyst, and they fixed on Jax with the instant, terrifying focus of a predator. Her weakness evaporated. It was a recovery so rapid it felt wrong, biologically impossible. She pushed herself up from the cot, ignoring the drying coagulant foam, and spoke. Her voice was pure, rich, and utterly commanding, possessing a resonance that seemed out of place in the cramped metallic box. "Status report," she commanded, her gaze sweeping over the cargo bay, the junk, the dust, the volatile power cores, with undisguised distaste. "Identify your affiliation and vector. Where is the fleet?" Jax, already exhausted and smelling strongly of fear and sweat, leaned against the entryway to the cockpit, wiping his greasy multi-tool on a piece of reclaimed synth weave. He took a long, slow breath before responding. "Status report, Ky'lara," he drawled, using the name displayed on the pod's cracked display. He tossed the dirty cloth onto a stack of capacitors. 1. You crashed your 1,000-credit high society teardrop into my 100-credit self-propelled dumpster. 2. The only fleet around here is the local cloud of ferrous dust particles, and they're highly unorganized. 3. You owe me a lifetime supply of medical-grade nanite stabilizers, plus a massive inconvenience fee, which I haven't calculated yet. And 4. Dinner is going to be reclaimed nutrient paste, flavor, I think, industrial gray. If you want a report, that's the report." Ky'lara stared at him, her long, pointed ears twitching slightly, a movement Jax realized was not decorative but expressive, like an animal testing the air. "Your terminology is primitive, Terran," she stated, her amethyst eyes narrowing in confusion and distaste. "You speak the standard galactic common tongue dialect, yet your technology and mannerisms suggest a pre-Federation level of development. Industrial gray is not a flavor designation. Where am I, specifically? And what is the political status of this system?" Jax chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "I'm Jax. You're on the drifter, and the political status of the system is that everything is abandoned and everything is mine. Look, I'm tired. I just pulled a 9-hour shift scraping hypervelocity plating off a dead warship, and now I've had to perform emergency field surgery. My nanites do excellent work on cellular damage, but they don't fix arrogance. I don't know who you are, or what kind of high-status cultural thing is going on with the ears, but I expect gratitude. My schedule is currently ruined. He watched her carefully. She carried herself with an absolute certainty of authority, an air that suggested planets, not salvage vessels, were her usual domain. This genetic feature, Ky'lara began, touching the curve of her ear with a single slender finger, her voice dropping to a low, intense register, is the mark of the sovereign Protectorate's core bloodline. It is not a cultural thing. And your cavalier attitude towards my identity is a profound tactical error. My name is Ky'lara En'Zylos, and I was on an unsanctioned Black Op transit run when my escape vessel was struck by an anti-sovereign pulse mine. Jax whistled softly. Pulse mine. That's why the hole looks so nasty. Someone really wanted you gone. Indeed. And you, a seemingly insignificant salvager in a derelict-class vessel, have now complicated matters for every party involved, she continued, her eyes blazing with cold fire. You saved me. A fact which, by the sacred laws of my people, has now created a debt that will exceed your understanding of value. Jax leaned closer, intrigued despite himself, but still determined to maintain his cynical detachment. Look, Ky'lara, I'm just a guy who likes rusty metal and quiet solitude. I don't need a profound debt. I need a new gravitic stabilizer for the medical cot and maybe, just maybe, an entire tank of new nanites. That's negotiable. Just sign here, acknowledging the medical fee, and I'll drop you off at the nearest Terran transfer station. I charge extra for intergalactic drama. Ky'lara merely crossed her arms, a gesture that managed to be regal even while she was standing amidst a pile of volatile scrap. The sight of her, so elegant and alienly beautiful with her pointed ears and blazing amethyst eyes, surrounded by the grime of his work, was utterly absurd. There will be no transfer station, Terran, she stated, her voice hardening. My enemies, the ones who deployed the pulse mine, will be tracking the residual energy signature of my jump. They know the general coordinates of my last viable position. If you drop me at a Terran hub, you place everyone there in existential jeopardy. Furthermore, you do not understand the covenant you have entered into. The Lex Vitae is not a negotiable contract for nanites. It is a binding allegiance. You saved the commander of the 10th Fleet. Therefore, the 10th Fleet owes you a debt that can only be discharged by the preservation of your life or your direct, stated command, which may not violate the integrity of the sovereign Protectorate. And right now, my direct, stated command is that you are not leaving this immediate sector. Jax finally stopped leaning and straightened up. The magnitude of her claim, commander of a fleet, was starting to override his immediate financial concerns. He stared at the minuscule, elegant pod that had nearly killed her, then back at the massive, empty void of the Veridian Belt. He had been looking for treasure, and instead, he had found a geopolitical landmine with long ears. A fleet, Jax repeated, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. You command a whole fleet, and you crash-landed in the galaxy's dumpster. That really says something about the quality of Galactic Fleet Command training these days. Look, I'm just going to have to make another joke about your oddly elven aesthetic, because the alternative, that I am now tangled up in a war between something called the Sovereign Protectorate and anti-sovereign pulse mines, is genuinely terrifying. Before Ky'lara could respond, the drifter's primary console began to flash violent, angry red. The ambient energy signatures in the Veridian Belt, usually a chaotic, low-level buzz of decaying radiation, were spiking, fast, concentrated, and closing. Jax, Dusty's synthesized voice was tight with urgency. We have multiple, high-velocity contacts. Utilizing advanced cloaking technology. They are converging on our position. Tracking the quantum decay from the escape pod's last transmission. I estimate 3 to 5 minutes before they achieve visual range and start shooting. Ky'lara's cool exterior finally shattered. Her eyes darted to the flashing console. My pursuers, she hissed, her pointed ears now drawn back in what Jax interpreted as pure, high-grade fear. She was immediately focused, military precision washing away her brief moment of arrogance. They are hunter-killers, designed to leave no trace. You must activate your warp drive immediately, Jax. We need to jump. Jax, however, was already moving toward the controls of his weapons array, the single, stubbornly functional light plasma cannon and the heavy magnetic grapples. He ran his hand over the worn controls of the drifter, feeling the familiar hum of the overworked reactor. Warp drive, he scoffed, already calculating trajectory. I don't have a warp drive, Ky'lara. I have a really strong magnet and a bad attitude. And I never run. Running wastes fuel, and fuel is expensive. He grinned, a genuine, manic flash of teeth that spoke of a deep-seated love for chaos. We're going to play hide-and-seek, Fleet Commander. And I'm going to teach you how to use a ton of scrap metal to settle a conflict. The drifter, a tiny scarred speck of ochre defiance, maneuvered deeper into the metallic, ancient canyons of the dreadnought's corpse, its sole pilot preparing to turn a junkyard into a weapon, with the commander of the 10th Fleet watching in stunned, silent disbelief from the cargo bay. The game was on. Jax didn't wait for the commander's permission, nor did he wait for a more eloquent plan to surface. The moment Dusty announced the incoming hunter-killers, Jax slammed the door release that sealed the cargo bay, leaving Ky'lara trapped in the metallic jumble with the volatile power cores. It was less a hostile gesture and more a practical one. The control center of the drifter was barely large enough for one man who actively despised sitting down, let alone a highly focused alien with pointed ears and a penchant for commanding things. The sheer, silent arrogance of the hunter-killers, closing with low-frequency cloaking, offended Jax's Salvager sensibility. They thought they were invisible. They were about to learn that in the Veridian Belt, nothing was truly hidden, especially not from someone whose livelihood depended on spotting a single, stray meter of rare alloy floating in a field of debris. Dusty, divert 80% of auxiliary power to the primary magnetic grapples and 30% to maneuvering thrusters, Jax commanded, his voice tight but controlled. And don't complain about the drain on the life support. The air will be recycled in a minute anyway, so no one will notice the difference. I notice the difference, Jax, Dusty retorted, the synthesized voice laced with digital panic. The power division exceeds safety parameters by 10%, and the strain on the gravity regulators will cause instability. We are about to be attacked by professional military assets, and you are suggesting we fight them with physics and rubbish. It's not rubbish, Dusty, it's assets, Jax corrected, his fingers flying across the controls, his eyes fixed on the schematic that mapped the dreadnought's massive broken spine. He began weaving the drifter deep into the ruins of the Vindicator, piloting the blunt, squat vessel with the frantic precision of a micro-racer. The derelict warship was the only cover they had, a labyrinth of twisted, heavy metal plates and colossal, dead systems. Jax didn't want to hide in it. He wanted to turn it into a medieval weapon. Targeting solution for incoming contact 1, Ky'lara's voice cut through the cabin's comm system, relayed from the cargo bay. Her tone was sharp, focused, instantly reverting to the professional military commander. Its cloaking field is sophisticated, generating a gravitational slipstream. Your sensors are only detecting it because of the wake. It is attempting to execute a low-sweep plasma strike in T-90 seconds. We must initiate evasive temporal maneuvers. Temporal maneuvers are what happens when rich people get bored, Jax shot back, ignoring her. We're going to use kinetic ones. Dusty marked 3 heavy rectangular slabs of depleted uranium armor plating, the ones near the aft maneuvering thrusters, and engaged the magnetic grapples. 3 massive, meter-thick plates, inert and impossibly heavy, were instantly latched by the drifter's colossal, external claws. These plates were designed to stop incoming particle beams, and now they were hanging off the side of Jax's ship like 3 extremely dangerous, rusty ornaments. The first hunter-killer drone, a sleek, triangular shape barely perceptible against the starfield, appeared on the drifter's visual display. It was a beautiful, terrible piece of engineering, moving with unnerving speed. Now! Jax yelled. He executed a sudden, violent lateral thrust, wrenching the drifter away from the plates. Simultaneously, he killed the magnetic containment fields on all 3 grapples. The plates, carrying the momentum of the drifter's initial vector, hurtled through the void, silent, massive projectiles aimed directly at the drone's projected flight path. The hunter-killer's targeting AI was sophisticated, but it was programmed to dodge weaponized energy and conventional missiles, not a 4-ton slab of obsolete armor plating traveling at several kilometers per second. There was no boom in the vacuum of space, only a brilliant, localized flash as the sheer kinetic energy tore through the drone's primary field and smashed its core into ultrafine metallic dust. Contact 1 eliminated, Dusty announced, sounding genuinely impressed, despite itself. The drone did not even manage to calculate the ballistic trajectory of the projectile. It seems military AI training lacks the concept of, "I'm just going to throw a fridge at you." "See, Ky'lara?" Jax muttered into the comms. Improvisation. Lesson 1. Always keep your best trash. "Your methodology is wildly inefficient, Terran," Ky'lara's voice returned, though Jax detected a thin crack of awe beneath the formal disapproval. "However, Contact 2 is adjusting its vector. It has identified the nature of your attack and is now utilizing a wideband kinetic shield. Your fridge-throwing technique will be ineffective against it." Jax saw the drone, having learned its lesson, widen its protective energy field. He smiled, a predatory grin that Ky'lara couldn't see. He knew exactly what to throw at shields. "Dusty, remember that volatile chemical hauler we salvaged 2 cycles ago? The Xenian one with the corrosive atmospheric stabilizers?" Jax asked. "The one you claimed was too dangerous to sell and decided to keep in a pressurized containment unit near the primary exhaust port? The one that is capable of fusing most known metallic alloys upon high-velocity contact?" Dusty asked, the sarcasm reaching impressive new heights. "Yes, Jax, I remember the highly toxic, volatile chemical compound you named the green sludge." "Why?" "Because Ky'lara says their shield is kinetic." "Not chemical," Jax explained, his fingers preparing the release sequence. "Ky'lara, brace yourself. We're about to vent some atmosphere." He waited until the second hunter-killer drone was maneuvering directly into the drifter's jet plume, the safest place for it to track the ship's movement. At the precise moment the drone entered the exhaust vector, Jax triggered the emergency release valve for the containment unit and slammed the main thrusters. A massive cloud of dense, bright green chemical stabilizer mist burst into the vacuum. The liquid immediately vaporized and flash froze, creating a cloud of hyper-corrosive, solid particles. They didn't hit the kinetic shield, they were sucked directly into the drone's exposed thrust intake ports. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The drone's maneuvering fins, delicate assemblies designed for minute adjustments, fused instantly. It began spinning uncontrollably, its elegant triangular form dissolving into a desperate, chaotic spiral. It plunged headlong, its own momentum carrying it into the vast, silent mouth of the dreadnought's engine core, where the internal reactor remnants provided the necessary spark for a spectacular, final disintegration. "Contact 2 neutralized," Dusty stated, now sounding less panicked and more grudgingly impressed. "Estimated efficiency of the green sludge as a military countermeasure, 98.7%. I recommend we reserve the remaining stabilizer for future engagements." "See, Ky'lara? It's not just trash, it's multi-purpose trash," Jax said, wiping sweat from his brow. But the final drone, Contact 3, was smarter, or perhaps just luckier. It had stayed far back, observing the demise of its compatriots. It executed a lightning-fast approach, refusing to enter the debris field or the chemical cloud, and locked on. A stream of high-energy plasma sliced through the drifter's aft port hull, dangerously close to the auxiliary reactor manifold. The ship bucked violently. Alarms shrieked. A sharp scent of burnt wiring flooded the cockpit. Jax slammed his hand onto the emergency patch system, rerouting all non-essential power, including the heating and interior lights, to the sputtering shield emitter. The cockpit went dark, illuminated only by the frantic red lights of the console. "Now that," Jax snarled, the humor draining instantly from his voice, "makes it personal." Ky'lara's voice was sharp in his ear. "Jax, its lock is solid. It's firing again in 5 seconds. Your shielding won't hold." Jax knew it. He didn't have time for another magnet trick. He spun the drifter violently, avoiding the incoming blast, and aimed his single, perpetually jamming light plasma cannon, not at the drone, but at a huge, unsupported wall of reinforced hull metal far above them. The plasma blast was weak, but it struck the metal at a structurally critical juncture. The wall cracked. "Brace!" Jax yelled. The plasma blast acted as a trigger. A catastrophic wave of collapsing metal, The entire unsupported roof of a kilometer-long corridor crushed the third drone beneath the weight of galactic neglect. The sound of the collapse, transmitted through the hull vibrations, was a long, agonizing metallic groan. Then, silence. Only the pathetic, wheezing sounds of the drifter's damaged auxiliary systems remained. Jax leaned back in his pilot's seat, his chest heaving, listening to the ship slowly stabilize. He stared at the red warning lights. He'd survived. His ship was scorched, his coffee machine was probably fried, but the hunter-killers were gone. Ky'lara exited the cargo bay, stepping carefully over a melted section of flooring. She was immaculate, but the shock of the fight had stripped away her military stiffness, leaving behind something raw and profound. She approached Jax, stopping just short of touching his soot-stained environment suit. Her pointed ears flared slightly in an expression Jax couldn't quite decipher, but which felt momentous. "Jax of the Drifter," she said, her voice now devoid of its earlier impatience, imbued instead with an ancient, profound gravity. "You have, through unorthodox yet undeniably brilliant means, successfully preserved my life against an assassination attempt by elements hostile to the sovereign Protectorate. Such a feat invokes the Lex Vitae, the law of life debt. It is a covenant binding to all of the 10th Fleet." Jax rubbed his gritty eyes. Yeah, the life debt. Look, I'm really not into covenants. I only sign agreements when they include a guaranteed minimum payment and a clause protecting my intellectual property rights on the green sludge. Can we just skip the profound covenant and talk about the invoice? Ky'lara paused, drawing herself up to her full, commanding height. The elegant curve of her ears, framed by her dark hair, seemed to accentuate the severity of the moment. "You do not understand. I am Commander Ky'lara En'Zylos, Sovereign Protectorate of the Cygnus Arm, and the 10th Fleet is now indebted to you for the duration of your natural life. This is not a transaction. It is a destiny. It involves hundreds of starships, billions of citizens, and the maintenance of stability across 3 major galactic quadrants. Your actions are now woven into the fate of the Protectorate." Jax's jaw dropped. He just wanted a standard salvager's fee for medical intervention. Maybe 500 credits now that she'd made him fight 3 expensive military drones. He stared at the woman. Wait, he stammered, holding up his multi-tool wrench like a defensive talisman. "Commander? 10th Fleet? You're telling me that this elaborate elf cosplay thing isn't a hobby, it's a uniform? I saved a whole darn fleet, Commander. Look, I'm serious. Can I just get the 500 credits? A life debt sounds way too complicated. Does that involve, like, quarterly reports? I hate paperwork almost as much as I hate high warp travel." Ky'lara gave him a tight, almost painful smile, a gesture that conveyed both high galactic command and profound personal annoyance. "It involves considerably more than meetings and paperwork, Jax. Your new life is about to become complicated. The Lex Vitae means you are now my obligor. You are bound to me, and I am bound to you. And given the severity of the threat, and the fact that those were only the initial scouts, we cannot remain in this sector for another microcycle." She moved to his navigation console with a shocking dexterity that defied the console's battered state. With the iridescent wrist-mounted device she had earlier used to contact her people, she bypassed Jax's clumsy firewalls and initiated a hyper-long-range communication sequence. The tiny device screamed with a quantum pulse far more intense than the earlier attempt. She began rattling off codes and coordinates in a language Jax had never heard, but which sounded utterly definitive, a cascade of crystalline clicks and precise, resonant tones. "Prepare the drifter for an immediate high-warp temporal jump," she ordered, turning back to Jax, her amethyst eyes gleaming with ruthless, newfound purpose. "The fleet is waiting. You are coming with me, Sovereign Obligor. You are going to take us directly to the Aegis Ascendant." Jax looked from the console, which now displayed coordinates placing them deep within highly restricted military space, to Ky'lara's expression of utter certainty. He put his head in his hands, his knuckles brushing against his greasy forehead. "You know, for someone who commands a whole armada, you really need to work on your hostage negotiation skills," Jax sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to finish my salvage run. And I hate high warp jumps. They make the gurgle leak." Before he could offer another protest, a massive, focused gravitational field, clearly emanating from Ky'lara's long-range communication, enveloped the drifter. The transition was instantaneous, brutal, and blindingly bright. Jax had a split second to feel the familiar sickening lurch of space folding violently around his small, unprepared vessel before the very stars vanished, replaced by a blinding, white nothingness that swallowed his ship, his troubles, and his entire previous life in one catastrophic burst of light. Ky'lara, standing firm despite the ship's violent shuddering, watched the viewscreen with fierce concentration. Her gaze fixed on the coordinates of the 10th Fleet, pulling their tiny, battered ship out of the galactic junkyard and into the heart of a cosmic war. The temporal jump was less of a fold and more of a total, systemic annihilation of reality followed by a sudden, violent reconstitution. The drifter, built for the placid, decaying drift of a salvage belt, howled in protest. Every bolt, panel, and weld joint vibrated at an unhealthy frequency. Jax, who had only experienced the short, choppy tactical jumps of low-grade pirate interceptors, clung to the pilot's yoke, his vision graying out as the localized gravity field Ky'lara had summoned pressed him deep into his seat. The experience was like being punched by the universe, then slowly squeezed in a cosmic vice. "I hate this. I hate this so much, Dusty," Jax gasped, his internal organs feeling like they'd been rearranged into an abstract art piece. "The structural integrity of the main hull is dropping below 25%, Dusty reported, its synthetic voice now completely flat, beyond panic and settling into existential dread. "The gravitic stabilizers are fully compromised. My estimate for the drifter retaining basic structural coherence upon emergence is negligible. Furthermore, the gurgle is leaking coolant. I suspect the high warp field introduced a massive, localized phase dislocation in the coffee mechanism." See, Ky'lara," Jax yelled, though his voice was barely a croak, addressing the commander through the static-filled comms. "You owe me an entire new coffee synthesis unit. This covenant is starting to cost you. And I haven't even had my industrial-grade nutrient paste yet." Ky'lara, who had been strapped into the passenger seat, a folding jump chair Jax usually used for storing his helmet, seemed utterly unfazed. Her luminous skin was untouched by the gravitational strain, and her amethyst eyes were fixed on the void. "We are approaching the stabilization point, Obligor. Concentrate on maintaining auxiliary power. And I assure you, your dietary preferences are the lowest priority of the 10th Fleet." Then, the white nothingness vanished. The transition from the violent, blinding wash of the temporal field to real space was instantaneous and startlingly quiet. The drifter stabilized with a final, pathetic shudder, and Jax saw the reason for the gravity distress. They were nestled within a localized, high-density gravitational well, a field so massive it was designed to deflect stellar radiation. Directly ahead, filling the viewport like a man-made moon, was the Aegis Ascendant. It was impossibly vast. It wasn't merely a ship, it was a mobilized orbital defense platform, a sleek, kilometer-spanning construct of obsidian black hull plating that seemed to absorb the light of the distant stars. It was perfectly, terrifyingly clean. There were no visible seams, no scuff marks, and certainly no signs of salvaged, multi-spectrum radar dishes held on with zip ties. "Oh, I feel ill," Jax muttered, staring at the sheer perfection. "It's too clean. I bet they don't even have a concept of patina. This is an aesthetic crime." Before Jax could offer further commentary, a massive, focus tractor beam snapped onto the drifter, pulling the tiny, battered ship toward a gigantic, perfectly circular hatch on the flagship's hull. The transition was so smooth, so efficient, that it felt insulting. They were deposited inside a docking bay large enough to host a small Terran city. The air was sterile, ozone-rich, and the temperature was regulated to a chilling, precisely controlled 19.5 degrees Celsius. The interior was lined with shimmering, matte silver composite, polished to a mirror sheen. It felt like being trapped inside a very expensive, very cold refrigerator. The moment the drifter's landing struts touched the polished floor, the bay instantly filled with docking personnel. They were tall, rigidly structured individuals, all non-Terran, clad in uniforms that looked like they had been injection-molded for maximum discipline. They approached the drifter with the kind of collective disdain usually reserved for a deeply fungal infestation. Ky'lara, meanwhile, had changed. The plain flight suit was gone. She was now clad in a formal fleet commander uniform, a breathtaking ensemble of midnight blue ceramic armor plates interwoven with shimmering silver fiber optics. The whole thing flowed with her movements, accentuating the natural, commanding grace of her posture. The long, elegant curve of her ears, the distinctive genetic trait of her people, stood out sharply against her tightly braided black hair, marking her as part of the ruling caste. She looked every bit the powerful, regal Commander Jax had accidentally saved. Jax, still in his oil-stained, soot-covered environmental suit, shuffled awkwardly out of his ship, carrying only a multi-tool wrench and the protein bar remnants he'd retrieved from the floor. He felt like a grease spot on a priceless tapestry. Ky'lara, followed by two towering bronze-skinned security guards who watched Jax with undisguised suspicion, approached a figure waiting at the ramp. This was Commander En'Zylos, Ky'lara's second-in-command, a tall, thin alien with 4 segmented arms and the sharp, angular head of a praying mantis. En'Zylos looked deeply, personally unhappy. "Commander Ky'lara." Xylos's voice was a dry, clicking sound transmitted through his vocalizer, devoid of warmth or welcome. "We tracked your emergency broadcast. Your swift return is unexpected, given the nature of the mission. And this organism." He gestured with a lower segmented arm toward Jax, his multiple eyes blinking in rapid, horrified succession. "This is the source of the quantum pulse. The reason we risked compromising our secure station coordinates and exerted maximum gravitational strain on the external environment? A Terran Salvager." Ky'lara fixed En'Zylos with a cold, absolute look that cut off further protest. "This is Jax, Commander. He is our sovereign obligor. He preserved my life against 3 highly advanced hunter-killers using nothing but debris and Xenian chemical waste. He now holds the Lex Vitae over the entirety of the 10th Fleet." En'Zylos reeled back, his multiple eyes tracking the arc of Jax's greasy wrench. "The Lex Vitae." "But Commander, the protocols explicitly forbid assigning the status of sovereign obligor to a primitive scavenger. The burden of the debt is meant to be held by an allied sovereign house, not a single, highly questionable human." "Protocols are moot when life is at stake, En'Zylos," Ky'lara stated firmly, the sound of her voice echoing slightly in the vast bay. She turned to Jax, her expression softening infinitesimally, though still overwhelmingly professional. "Your previous life, obligor, is concluded. Your new life as a critical asset of the sovereign Protectorate begins now. The very assassination attempt that put me in that escape pod was due to a systemic, persistent flaw in the Aegis Ascendant's ether drive's inertial dampening field, a flaw that has been gradually corrupting the jump calculations for 3 cycles. It allowed the hostile elements to predict our vector." Jax blinked, attempting to process the torrent of high-tech terminology. Wait. So you're saying I'm not just a debt slave, I'm a debt slave mechanic? And I have to fix a giant, perfect, space elf engine?" Ky'lara ignored the elf comment with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 100 times before. "Our most brilliant engineers cannot locate this flaw because they are trained in perfection, En'Zylos. They understand creation. They understand how things should work. They expect flawless execution." She gestured grandly at the massive, clean engineering bay. "You, obligor, are a master of failure. You understand chaos. You live in the wreckage of failure, and you specialize in patchwork engineering. You know precisely how systems are compromised, not by design, but by neglect and improvisation." "I've never even seen an ether drive," Jax protested, adjusting his welding mask. "I usually work with late-model fission cores and glorified steam engines. This thing probably has more processing power than the entire Terran Alliance." "Precisely," Ky'lara affirmed, looking utterly convinced. "A perfect system cannot detect the imperfection it harbors. Only an external element, one accustomed to functional disarray, can see the flaw." She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Jax and En'Zylos could hear. "The stability of 3 major galactic quadrants depends on this ship's operational integrity. Your first task is simple: find the hidden flaw in our perfect starship. And En'Zylos, you will escort the obligor to the primary ether drive core and provide him with all requested diagnostic tools and data access." En'Zylos shuddered, a full-body click of disapproval. "Commander, I must protest. Putting a Terran, a scavenger, with direct access to our primary power matrix is a profound risk to security integrity. His hands are contaminated. He neutralized 3 hunter-killers with refuse. I suggest you focus less on his hands, En'Zylos, and more on the integrity of the drive, Ky'lara stated, her voice returning to that chilling calm. Jax took a slow, deep breath, finally accepting the horrifying reality of his situation. He looked at En'Zylos, who looked back with murderous intensity. Jax sighed, adjusting the tool belt heavy with salvaged wires and scrap metal. "So, let me get this straight," Jax said, running a finger along his grease-stained suit. "I went from worrying about which flavor of nutrient paste to eat, to being an intergalactic fleet commander's personal fixer because I used an emergency nanite syringe. This is a nightmare. I guess I should have just asked for the 200 credits and a new set of gravitic dampeners. This life debt thing is the most expensive mistake I've ever made." He shrugged and gave En'Zylos a wry, greasy smile. "Don't worry, En'Zylos. I'm sure I can find some rust in this magnificent palace of yours." "There's always rust." Ky'lara gave En'Zylos a final, firm nod, then swept away, leaving Jax alone with the highly distressed, four-armed second-in-command. En'Zylos reluctantly led Jax out of the docking bay. They navigated a maze of perfectly lit, white corridors, a relentless sequence of geometric perfection that made Jax's eyes ache. "Do you not understand the gravity of your situation, Terran?" En'Zylos hissed, his voice dropping to a low, intense click as they traveled through a high-speed magnetic transit tube. "You are now tied to the highest level of our civilization. The slightest transgression, the smallest failure of loyalty—" "Look, En'Zylos," Jax interrupted, completely unconcerned, staring out at the blur of the tube's interior. "I saved your boss's life. My life insurance is currently the entire 10th Fleet. I'm pretty sure if I break a coffee mug, you guys have to buy me a new planet. So, let's dial down the existential threat stuff. And for the record, I was never given a security briefing. I have no concept of your loyalty. I just want my toolbox back and maybe a window that opens, because this recycled air is making me feel too clean." En'Zylos stopped the transit tube with a violent magnetic shudder that seemed to be intended entirely for Jax's discomfort. They had arrived at a colossal, reinforced door bearing the glowing, complex symbol of the ether drive core. "The ether drive," En'Zylos announced, standing rigid as a sentinel. "The heart of our capacity for galactic travel. Do not touch anything. Do not breathe too heavily. Do not, under any circumstances, utilize anything salvaged from your derelict vessel." Jax simply stared at the door, then back at En'Zylos. "So, you want me to find a flaw that your perfect engineers can't see, in a system I don't understand, using tools I don't have, without touching anything. Got it. This is going to be hilarious." He pushed past En'Zylos and entered the ether drive core. The room was immense, circular, dominated by the core itself, a massive, shimmering quantum field generator that pulsed with a soft, ethereal blue light. The technology was mesmerizing, almost religious in its complexity and perfection. It was pure science fiction, the stuff of legend, humming with tightly controlled cosmic forces. Jax took in the impossible cleanliness, the flawless symmetry, and the distinct lack of a single visible wire hanging loose. He put down his multi-tool wrench and sighed, the sound echoing in the silent chamber. "All right, Dusty," he whispered to his AI through a discreet comm link he knew En'Zylos wouldn't detect. "Time to go to work. We're looking for the digital equivalent of a broken zip tie." Jax stood in the ether drive core, utterly silent. The room was so immense and geometrically perfect that it felt less like engineering and more like a cathedral built for a physics god. The centerpiece, the quantum field generator, pulsed with that soft, dangerous blue light, humming at a frequency that made the fillings in Jax's teeth ache. Commander En'Zylos stood stiffly by the entrance, his 4 arms folded in an expression of multi-limbed disapproval. "I need access to the primary maintenance logs, the tertiary diagnostic feed, and a complete temporal trace of the last 50 high warp jump calculations," Jax finally announced. He was staring, not at the colossal generator, but at a tiny access panel high on the wall, its surface utterly unmarred. "You do not need anything, Terran," En'Zylos clicked, his voice like grinding stone. "You request. And these files contain the highest state secrets of the Protectorate. They are secured by 4 layers of fractal encryption and require a commander-level biometric override. You will not view them until I have purged all non-essential data and translated the schematic from the original progenitor script. Jax turned, his eyes narrowing. En'Zylos, I'm here to find the flaw your perfect engineers missed. Your perfect engineers are trained to read perfection. I'm trained to read rust. And rust, in a system this clean, isn't always metal. Sometimes it's a rounding error buried deep in an algorithm, a lazy bit of code someone thought wouldn't matter. Now, either you bypass your commander and give me the access, or I'm going to use my multi-tool to short the nearest auxiliary power junction, and then we'll see how quickly your encryption holds up. En'Zylos's triple-lidded eyes widened fractionally. He didn't move. He stood there, a vision of outraged military discipline, facing off against a man whose primary negotiation tactic was implied electrical damage. Jax raised his multi-tool, clicking the plasma cauterizer on. With a disgusted, rattling sigh, En'Zylos slammed his upper set of hands onto the control panel. I will grant you read-only access to the translated files. But you will perform this inspection from the designated security station, and you will not, under any circumstances, contaminate the console with your particulate matter. Jax grinned, retrieving a clean nutrient wrapper from his pocket and laying it on the spotless desk before setting his elbow down. See? We can compromise. Dusty, patch into the local network through my tool and start correlating. We're looking for a glitch in the matrix that smells like a recurring decimal. The raw data was staggering. Terabytes of computational integrity reports, chronometric sequencing, and inertial dampening metrics, all organized with the pristine, intimidating logic of the sovereign Protectorate. Any sane engineer would have been paralyzed by the scale. But Jax was not sane, and Dusty was relentless. The integrity reports are flawless, Jax, Dusty whispered directly into Jax's suit comms, bypassing the chamber's audio system. No hardware degradation detected. Every jump calculation has been executed with 0 variance, down to the quadrillionth decimal point. This starship is literally perfect. That's the flaw, Dusty, Jax said, leaning closer to the screen, tracing a trajectory diagram with a grime-covered finger, carefully hovering above the surface. Perfection. Their inertial dampening field compensates for the gravitational effect of the Aegis Ascendant's own mass, right? Yes. It is designed to perfectly neutralize the flagship's local gravitational pull during high warp transition, ensuring smooth exit at the target vector. Exactly. But nothing in the universe is perfectly smooth. Every high warp jump involves crossing a localized micro-event horizon, even a controlled one. That creates a minute temporary distortion, a slight residual quantum ripple that interacts with the ship's own neutralized gravitational field. The field compensates flawlessly, but only after the ripple occurs. It should be an immediate, passive compensation. Jax brought up the temporal trace logs. The flaw isn't in the execution, it's in the protocol. Show me the sequence for the residual mass flow compensation cycle. The data scrolled across the screen. It confirmed Jax's suspicion. The Protectorate engineers, trained to value clean, efficient code, had programmed the system with a tiny, elegant latency parameter. It was designed to ignore the initial, chaotic noise of the quantum ripple, only beginning the dampening field's final minute adjustment 1 microsecond after the ship had fully exited the warp field. The hunter-killers aren't tracking Ky'lara's escape pod, Jax realized, the rush of discovery making him forget the pressure of En'Zylos's disapproval. They're tracking the ship's exhaust. That 1 microsecond lag means that for a predictable, repeating instance of time, a tiny, almost meaningless fraction, the ship's true, uncompensated mass briefly leaks a gravimetric signature before the dampeners kick back in. It's an exhaust plume of almost perfection, En'Zylos. And they calculated their assassination attempt based on that predictable signature. He slammed his hand onto the print command, a button he immediately regretted touching due to the sheer amount of fingerprints he was leaving, and a sheet of shimmering synth paper slid out. The solution is simple, Jax said, looking triumphant. You need to reduce the latency parameter from 1 microsecond to 0, turning the compensation from reactive to proactive, even if it introduces noise into the dampening field. You have to anticipate the flaw. The perfect must account for the messy. En'Zylos snatched the synth paper with an audible click, his multiple eyes rapidly scanning the Terran's hastily drawn annotations and circuit notations. The manted commander turned a shade paler than his usual bronze. He immediately activated his own wrist comm. Commander Ky'lara, report to the Ether Drive Core immediately. The obligor has achieved a preliminary diagnosis. Ky'lara arrived moments later, her elegant uniform flowing around her like a dark river. She didn't look at Jax. Her gaze was fixed on En'Zylos, demanding an explanation. En'Zylos, forced into the awkward position of having to praise a salvager, extended the printout. "Commander," En'Zylos stammered, the clicks in his voice betraying his profound discomfort. "The obligor has identified the vulnerability. It is not a hardware fault, but a protocol flaw in the inertial dampening field's compensation cycle. He claims the 1 microsecond lag in the residual mass flow sequence generates a detectable, predictable gravimetric signature that the enemy is utilizing to calculate our jump vectors." Ky'lara's expression remained unreadable as she took the paper. She didn't look at the technical details. She looked at the margin, where Jax had scrawled a small, crude drawing of a stick figure throwing a wrench at a spaceship. "You found the flaw," she stated, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire fleet. "A flaw that has undermined the integrity of the Protectorate's military movements for cycles. A flaw that has caused the death of countless personnel in other, unfortunate incidents." Jax shrugged, crossing his arms. "Yeah, well, En'Zylos here said your engineers were too perfect. And I'm the king of not perfect. If you spend your whole life polishing, you forget how things actually get dirty." Ky'lara stepped closer to Jax, ignoring En'Zylos entirely. "The flaw will be corrected immediately. Our jump protocols will be purged, sanitized, and updated across the entire 10th Fleet. The threat is neutralized. The assassination attempt is thwarted. You have performed your duty as the sovereign obligor, and your life has been preserved, as mandated by the Lex Vitae." She paused, her amethyst eyes searching his, looking for something beyond the grime and the sarcasm. "The debt, Jax, is now discharged. You are free. You have earned a full, unconditional pardon and the highest possible financial reward, enough credits to buy you a modest planet, should you choose." Jax stared at her. A modest planet. Enough to never touch another rusty piece of hull plating again. He could finally afford a self-cleaning, fully functional Gurgle 2.0. But the thought, strangely, felt hollow. He was Jax of the Drifter, not Jax of the planet. He had spent his life valuing freedom and independence over everything, even comfort. His life wasn't about avoiding chaos, it was about mastering it. "A planet," Jax mused, rubbing his chin. "That's a nice thought. But planets have taxes, Ky'lara, and governments, and people who try to organize things. That sounds way too complicated. And frankly, a life of just sipping synth tea and ordering fusion coils from a catalog sounds boring." He looked around the pristine chamber, back at the gleaming quantum field generator, and then at En'Zylos, whose facial segments were still twitching with suppressed indignation. "I'm changing the terms of the debt," Jax declared. "My life was preserved, yes. Your life was preserved, yes. The flaw is fixed. But I didn't save the 10th Fleet for a paycheck or a planet. I saved it because those hunter-killers were aiming at my ship, and they made my coffee machine leak. That, as I said, made it personal. And now I know you're fighting an enemy that's smart enough to look for a flaw in a microsecond." Ky'lara looked utterly confused. "You can't change the terms of the Lex Vitae. It is ancient law. What is your command, obligor? What is the price of your freedom?" Jax leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone that finally wiped the last trace of the imperious commander from Ky'lara's face. "My price is this. You need a chief of patchwork engineering. Someone who knows how things break, not just how they're built. Someone who'll spot the next rounding error before it gets you killed. My life debt is discharged, Commander. But I'm invoking a new covenant. I will not accept the credits, the planet, or the freedom." He pointed a greasy finger at the large, pristine ship. "I want an employment contract. Short-term, high-hazard, zero paperwork. I'll stay on the Aegis Ascendant for 1 solar cycle. I'll make sure your whole perfect fleet is patched up with enough cynical realism to survive the next assassination attempt. And my salary is a fully functional, self-cleaning coffee synthesis unit, the Gurgle 2.0, and unlimited access to your scrap piles. You can call me your Director of Applied Chaos." En'Zylos let out a sound like shattered glass. "A director? With that ship in our bay?" "Commander, you can't be serious." Ky'lara, however, stared at Jax, the faintest hint of a genuine smile, a terrifying sight, curving her lips. She finally understood that Jax's freedom wasn't found in isolation, but in the biggest, dirtiest problems he could find. He had traded his quiet, simple life not for credits, but for purpose and high-stakes technical challenge. He was still the scruffy, cynical Salvager, but now his scope was the galaxy. "Done," Ky'lara said, reaching out to clasp his arm, a sudden, unexpected gesture of respect that made Jax flinch. "I accept your counter-covenant. Director Jax of Applied Chaos. Welcome aboard. En'Zylos will show you to your new quarters. They are on Deck 4, adjacent to the primary auxiliary vent shaft, where the air quality most closely matches your drifter." Jax retrieved his tool wrench and gave Ky'lara a tired, satisfied nod. "Good. Now, you should probably get someone to sweep up all the metal I just threw at your enemy. And tell En'Zylos that if I find another systemic flaw, I'm painting my ship on the side of yours." En'Zylos, defeated, merely clicked. A few hours later, Jax sat in the captain's chair of the drifter, which was now situated in a designated permanent repair dock near the flagship's main drive. He had officially transferred his command duties to Ky'lara's service. Dusty was already interfacing with the flagship's vast internal network, eagerly hunting for more rounding errors. "Jax, I have successfully identified 47,000 potential points of failure that the Protectorate's engineers have deemed acceptable anomalies that are, in fact, catastrophic risks," Dusty reported, its voice sounding unusually excited. "Our new life will be substantially more complex, and yet strangely fulfilling." Jax took a slow sip from a mug of perfectly synthesized, industrial-gray nutrient paste. The mug was from the Gurgle 2.0, which sat humming in the cockpit, a thing of pristine, glorious, self-cleaning beauty. He was still wearing his grubby suit, but now he was looking not at the scrap of the past, but at the vast, complex, dangerous future of the 10th Fleet, a future he was now responsible for keeping functional. He sighed, a long, dramatic sound that signaled his return to business. "It's not fulfilling, Dusty. It's just a bigger junkyard. And you know what they say, one man's scrap is another man's galactic military crisis. Now, fire up the diagnostic for the main deflector shield. I think I see a loose cable. And I bet it's a red one,"